Hi, I'm Becky Salatan, publisher of Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. I'm so pleased that you could join us this evening in celebration of Indignation Day, in honor of Philip Roth and his new novel. Indignation tells the story of Marcus Messner, a college student, and his critical encounters with life's unimagined chances and terrifying consequences, set against the backdrop of the Korean War. I count myself infinitely luckier than Marcus, since one of my own unimagined chances is the opportunity to participate in the publication of this extraordinary book. After 28 previous books, after the Pulitzer, the National Medal of Arts, the Academy of Arts and Letters Gold Medal in Fiction, after the 2 National Book Awards and the 2 National Book Critics Circle Awards, after the Penn Bellow Award, the 2 Penn Nabokov Awards, and the 3 Penn Faulkner Awards, after all that and more, Roth's power and intensity seem undiminished, as David Gates observes on the cover of next Sunday's New York Times Book Review. His capacity to invent and reinvent unmatched. In Indignation, he has given us yet another knockout novel. What did we do to deserve all that, and this evening, too? You can't sustain such power and intensity under constant limelight, which is why we are doubly lucky tonight, when the wonders of modern technology have offered us the opportunity to have our cake and read him, too. Here to talk with Philip about Indignation and to put to him some of your questions is Benjamin Taylor. Ben is the author of the novels The Book of Getting Even and Tales Out of School, and a book of essays, Into the Open. He is also the editor of a forthcoming collection of the letters of Saul Bellow. A longtime member of the graduate writing program faculty at the New School, Ben has also taught at Washington University in St. Louis, Bennington College, and Columbia University as well. Welcome, Ben. Welcome, Philip. Welcome, booksellers and readers out there, and happy Indignation Day to us all.
Good evening to all of you out there. At the 50 participating bookshops throughout the United States. And congratulations, Philip Roth, on this, your 29th book.
Thank you.
It puts me in mind of your first book, Goodbye Columbus, which is also a young man's story, a story of leaving home and entering a larger world, a story of a young man beset by circumstances that he's not the author of. But the similarities end there. Indignation is a tragic story of youth, though a story with a lot of comedy in it. And it is the story of somebody beset by history itself, by the great trickster history, whose wiles can never be foreseen, least of all by an 18 or 19-year-old in America in 1950, 51, 52.
Yeah, I hadn't thought, until you just mentioned it, that there's a pairing there of Goodbye Columbus with Indignation by way of the young hero, and you're right, of course. The young hero of Goodbye Columbus does not find himself trapped in history, I think in part because I was so young when I wrote it, I had no idea what history was. It's only as the years and decades have passed that I've begun to look back and see the historical periods through which I have lived with some perspective. And in fact, Indignation began with my thinking about the period. I wasn't thinking about the story of Marcus Messner. I wasn't thinking about his mother, his father, his girlfriend, his college. I had no story at all in mind. I just had a period in mind. And that was that Korean War, which began in June of 1950. And I began college in September of 1950. And the war ended in 1953. So it was the backdrop to my college years. And I realized that I had never really attended to that period in fiction, though it was an interesting period. And so I began reading, which is something I often do when I begin a book. I began reading about the war. I read 9 or 10 books about the war. I watched a 6-part miniseries about the war with you, if I remember correctly, about the Korean War called The Forgotten War. And I did all that because I thought this is a fertile field, but what am I going to plant in it, you know? And I was just waiting for the story to emerge and for me to be able to plant this story in that historical moment, and that's what I did.
Many people in the audience tonight have memories of the Vietnam War, or at a minimum know something about the Vietnam War. Many fewer, I expect, know anything about the Korean War. Mm-hmm. But it was a defining moment in American history, our mid-century war, as you call it in this book, and it had particularly terrifying aspects to it. I don't know of another novel that describes as vividly as this the home front in the Korean War period.
Mm-hmm. Well, the home front consists in my book of the young man being worried about being drafted. There was a draft. Being drafted and being killed in the war. The war was a particularly brutal one. They're all brutal, but this one was indeed a brutal one. And his fear is that if he loses his college deferment, he'll go to Korea and be slaughtered. And indeed, he does lose his college deferment, as you know.
It wasn't a war in which there was mass protest. It wasn't a war in which there were people going to Canada or burning draft cards. None of that.
No. The backdrop to the war was a very calm home front. The Vietnam War was brand new. There had been nothing like the turbulence of the Vietnam War in American history, I think. The Korean War took place of course, on the Korean Peninsula. And here in America, a few people were engaged by it. The country wasn't totally mobilized as it had been during World War II.
The book is divided into two sections plus a historical note. The first one, cryptically entitled, I think for the reader, most of the way through Under Morphine. The second, much briefer section, Out From Under. Is there some guidance you can give to a reader about those words, Under Morphine?
Yes, well, I was, they're there deliberately. My hero is under morphine, and there's no way you can know that unless you read the title. But the bulk of the book is a morphine reverie, in which he recalls what preceded the necessity for the morphine, and in this reverie, he imagines that he's dead, and out from under he comes out from under the morphine.
What he's meditating on is a series of mishaps, comic, youthful, familiar terrain, but they have the most outlandish and disproportionate consequences, as if the most galling truth of the book were that these tiny decisions, these tiny susceptibilities, can have the largest consequences.
Well, it begins with his father, who's a kosher butcher and owns a little neighborhood butcher shop, with his father being transformed. His father and he had been close and loving all through his childhood. And then in his late adolescence, or when he begins college, his father is transformed into a worry machine. And he becomes frantically worried about his son. He has a premonition. He has a premonition that the boy that something awful is going to happen to the boy.
Yes.
And you can imagine what it's like to live with someone who has such a premonition about you.
He's suddenly aware of all the ways a young man entering the world can be destroyed.
Right, yes. And the premonition seems outlandish to the young man and galling, and it's why he chooses to go off to Ohio to college. The premonition seems outlandish to his mother, to the boy's mother, and the only one it doesn't seem outlandish to is the one who has the premonition. So he's like a character in a fable or a fairy tale who suddenly has a notion which people are in flight from.
About that college in Ohio, it's called, resonantly, Weinsberg College. I think I understand some of the reasons why. like Sherwood Anderson's Winesburg, Ohio, this college has its full share of grotesques. A dean, a president, extremely vivid cast of young characters, including a boy named Flusser, who's always on stage, whether he's on stage or not. Did you have other reasons for calling this college Winesburg?
I didn't even have those until you enunciated them for me.
And this may be wrong.
I was just reading Winesburg, Ohio, at the time I began writing the book. And what I did think was that if in this town of Winesburg, which Anderson does portray as being full of what he calls grotesques, where people live rather claustrophobic and repressed lives, that if there was a college in this town, it would be this college that I invent, and I call it Winesburg, Ohio. I take some street names from Anderson's book. I take the name of the inn from Anderson's book. It's a wonderful little book that has fallen out of favor, really. I don't think anyone really reads Sherwood Anderson any longer, but I had that in mind, yes.
A rigid code of mores is in place at this school at the exact middle of the American 20th century that younger readers will find bizarre and completely unrecognizable. Can you say something about them?
I agree with you. One of the things that prompted me to put the book together as I did was the realization that younger people, or anybody who's come to maturity, let's put it another way, anybody who's come to maturity in the last 30 years, they don't even have to be that young, has no idea what the social and cultural and sexual norms of the 1950s were. And so I wanted to replicate them. As you know, what happens in the book is that the rules and regulations and the surveillance under which they live is so strong that eventually what rises in young Marcus as a result is indignation.
There are the walking wounded in this book too. A girl who ought to be at Mount Holyoke, but for complex reasons finds herself at Winesburg College, and she's quite instrumental to the plot. Can you say something more about Olivia?
Yeah, Olivia. I thought you were going to say a girl who ought to be at Mount Sinai.
No.
But because she does have a checkered psychiatric past, and she has been institutionalized. And she's quite lovely, and he falls for her. And he's doesn't know what to do because she slit her wrist, or one wrist. His mother says his mother says to him she slit her wrists. He says one wrist. She says we only have two.
She seems to have a kind of sexual experience that belongs more to the next generation than to her own.
Well, there were sports. There always are, and she's a sport really. She's a bit of an adventurer, and a bit free and maybe reckless. And he doesn't know what to do with this. I think the measure of the mores is that this intelligent, worldly enough young man, when confronted by the sexuality of this young woman, doesn't know quite what to do about it. He's flabbergasted by it. He's bewildered by it.
What could have saved Marcus? Poor Marcus.
What could have saved him?
What could have saved him? Each of these encounters with a problematic roommate, a second problematic roommate, a problematic girl, a rather fiendish dean. It's as if his fate is being settled piece by piece, and he doesn't know it. The only thing that could have kept him out of harm's way, it seems to me, would have been Newark.
Not leaving home.
Not leaving home.
What could have saved Oedipus?
Yeah, what could have saved Oedipus? He didn't know who that was at that crossroads.
I wanted to have him be led to his fate, his awful fate, through a series of small incidents seem at the time even comic, you know. And I wanted the father's premonition to cast a powerful spell over the book, as I think it does.
We're listening in on the operations of fate, not just one thing after the other, but some terrible accumulation of chance circumstances that altogether spell tragedy. The mother says to him when she comes to visit, the earmarks of tragedy are here. She doesn't know how truly she's speaking.
Right. And the plumber, if you remember in the beginning, says to Marcus's father, the world is just waiting to devour your son. So they all speak the truth, but one doesn't see that hand that's written that condemnation. One doesn't see the writing.
In Portnoy's complaint, the protagonist, Alexander Portnoy, says at one point, where did these parents of mine come by their fearful sense of life? Well, in this book, the fearful sense of life is the accurate take on
Yes.
life.
Yeah.
I have here a lot of questions from readers at various bookshops.
Okay, great.
For example, this one from Richard Howarth at Square Books in Oxford, Mississippi. Most great writers tend to do their best work early in their careers. You seem to be doing some of your best work now with the American Trilogy and most recently with another kind of series. What is your response to this? I mean, do you feel you have learned things about writing or through writing or about what it is you have to say over time that have given such great power to your latest work?
Well, I appreciate the evaluation. I just truly go about it the same way I always did. I just do my work. I don't know that writing has become any easier for me. In fact, if anything, it may become more difficult for me, or put another, it's just no more difficult than it's ever been. And every book is, for me, difficult. I can't explain I can't account for the quality of the work. It isn't that I'm working longer days. I have indeed given up some things that used to be in my life, like teaching and so on, but to conserve energy. But I don't think that has any there's any result that comes from that. So the best I can say to a correspondent is that I don't know.
Sue Scheidler at the University of Notre Dame bookstore asks this about your latest book. Does the title of your book, Indignation, refer to the attitude of your protagonist, Marcus Messner, or were you intending for it to have larger political implications?
No, it doesn't have any political implications that I know of. I would say that it applies to virtually every male character in the book. His father is indignant, and the dean at the college is indignant, and the president of the college is mightily indignant, and Marcus's roommates are indignant, and he clashes with them. So all these men are subject to fits of indignation. Yeah.
And the word itself is plucked out of a song very important in modern Chinese history that was the anthem of resistance in World War II, resistance to the Japanese, and then becomes the, if I have this right, the national anthem of the PRC.
It's the national anthem of the People's Republic of China. And everybody heard it played 60,000 times in the last month at the Olympics, whenever the Chinese won a gold medal. The words go, "Arise, ye who refuse to be bond slaves. Out of our very flesh and blood, we will build a new great wall. China's masses have met the day of danger. Indignation fills the hearts of all of our countrymen."
Marcus has this running through his head at certain critical moments.
When he gets angry, it runs
because it was a good and wholesome song when he was a little boy. Now that he's a grown man, it's the song of the enemy, half a world away.
It's valuable to him. It marshals his strength. So, yeah.
Mary Tolman at the University of California, Berkeley bookstore asks this. You once said in an interview that there should be a 100-year moratorium on literary talk and that readers should be left alone to fight with the books on their own. I guess this means about literary criticism. Sounds good to me, but how do we justify this how do we justify this prohibition, and isn't there some small illumination that you could give a dedicated reader of your book?
Isn't there some small
illumination? She's asking you to act as your own critic a little bit.
I don't remember the circumstances under which I said that, but I remember thinking it. And now I would rephrase it and say, just wait 100 years, and there'll be nobody talking about books at all. So all I have to do is be patient.
This same reader, Mary Tolman, asks this. The 60s color several of your novels. Outside of the obvious cultural shifts and upheavals, what else is it about the 60s that prompts you to write about this time period? I think she has in mind, a number of books, including American Pastoral.
And The Dying Animal is referred, the 60s are referred to quite frequently. Well, the 60s were the most vivid decade I've lived through as an American citizen. There has been nothing like them since. 9/11 was a disaster on catastrophic proportions and has left us with lots of problems. But the decade of the 60s had a different flavor. And I don't see how a writer can not be interested in registering that reality and resorting to it as a subject. In American Pastoral, I wrote about a family who has a daughter who plants a bomb as a protest against the Vietnam War. And the bomb blows up a local postal station and someone is killed. And when I began that book, I still had I began the book about 20 years before I wrote it. When I began it, I began with the scene of the girl blowing up the building because that had been going on all around us during the 60s. There were several hundred buildings blown up on U.S. territory during the Vietnam War, all on university campuses, at the Capitol, and in other places, office buildings and so on. So that stuff stuck to me, and eventually I was able to get perspective on it, write American Pastoral.
A number of readers ask versions of the following question. Do you have the crises of our own moment in history in mind when you take up the Korean War, the Vietnam era, or World War II? Are you filtering emotion about our present plight through these earlier historical?
Not intentionally, no. No, I'm really focused on then. If the book is about the 60s and 70s and the Vietnam War, that's what the book is about. I don't want it to be about something else. If I wanted it to be about something else, I'd write the book about something else. The Plot Against America was my attempt to reimagine life in America in the 1940s. But it had nothing to do with life under the Bush administration, as some readers thought, but rather an attempt to think through what might have been at that period, what America would have been like had we not gone to war against the Nazis.
Some people reading Indignation have thought they were hearing a voice from the grave. In fact, the voice early on in the book, I'm not giving very much away, announces, I have been dead for some years now. But the reality of the book is that all of this reflection is taking place at the moment of death, at the threshold of death, not in some post-mortal place.
No, but he's in, as I say, this morphine reverie, and in a morphine reverie, one doesn't know where one is, and is completely lost, and therefore he imagines this must be death. I must have died, and this is death. And this is what it's like. You just keep remembering the immediate past. Then, and I won't explain how, but then he does die.
You said once in an interview that what you need in order to work is person X in jam Y, and that's at its most fundamental how fiction works, that it's about trouble, that it had better be bad trouble in order to be interesting, and it must be about an individual.
Is there any fiction about somebody who's not in trouble?
No, I don't think so.
Aside from children's books. And even in the children's books, they get in trouble.
And they get out.
They get out of it, yeah. Well, you can get out of it.
Well, there are two ways out. There's the Jane Austen way out of trouble, which is marriage and harmony, and the harmonized world.
Then there's the Saul Bellow way into trouble, which is marriage.
Which is marriage. And then there's this way out of trouble, which is the least knowable. Other questions? Leanne Faco at Stanford University Bookstore says, I think that Indignation, while set during the Korean War, will strike many college-age students as being timely and relevant to Iraq, the polarity and attitudes with regard to both an academic environment and political discourse. Did you intend this book to resonate across generations, or did you set out primarily to capture the zeitgeist of an era? I would just rephrase this a little to ask about how is it that you differ from the historian? Obviously, you can make up things on every page as the historian can't make anything up. But at some point in your career, did you begin thinking of yourself as taking on the history of your own times, the soul of the nation as it has developed from the 1930s to now?
Yes, I think I did. I think beginning with, strangely, a Sabbath theater, I let the American past flow into the book, you know. In Sabbath theater, it's the death of the brother in World War II. Sabbath's brother, I forget his name now, is killed in flying over the Philippines just about a year before the end of the war. And this determines the young Sabbath's life, really. And the great grief of Sabbath's life is the death of that brother in the war. So he's scarred by it. And he's a great clown, but he's a great clown with a great grief. Then after Sabbath theater, I think I wrote American Pastoral. And I had to make use of the Vietnam War. I had been consumed by it, like so many other people, when it was happening, consumed with indignation, among other things. And now I could recollect the whole period in tranquility and write a book drawn on what I knew, what I'd seen, what I'd observed or heard about, you know. And then after American Pastoral, I wrote I Married a Communist. And in that book, I drew upon what I knew about the post-war anti-communist investigations. Not the McCarthy period, because the McCarthy period begins strangely in June, at the same time the Korean War begins, June 1950, McCarthy appears on the scene. But in the years immediately before that, there was a House Un-American Activities Committee, there were Senate investigating committees, and the hounding of people had begun. I knew something about it because of my own family's biography, and so that became the grid on which I put I Married a Communist. And then the third book in that trilogy was called The Human Stain, and that took place in the Clinton years when the persecution of Bill Clinton was underway. and I wanted my character to be persecuted in a similar way, and reflect what I thought to be the moral hazards of that era.
It seems to me that all three of those books, which are grouped together as the American trilogy, have protagonists who are taken to pieces, not just by private circumstances, but taken to pieces by their times. And that does make a trilogy, make a trilogy of those three books. I remember lines from Sabbath Theater that you wrote. We are immoderate because grief is immoderate, all the hundreds and thousands of kinds of grief. The immoderate grief seems to be the red thread running through the work from the mid-90s to now. Certainly the grief of Marcus's parents is immoderate and lethal in the case of the father.
Yeah. To go on with your question about history, the circumstance which I think changed my focus was that I'd been living abroad for about 10 or 12 years, living mostly abroad. And when I came back to America, I came back because I felt I was losing touch with America, and not just losing touch with friends, but losing touch with the ethos of the country. I didn't think that was a good idea. And so when I came back, I discovered a new subject that was an old subject, that is this country. But it felt like a new subject to me, yet I was knowledgeable about it. And I think that launched me into that series of books.
You did a lot of reading of American books.
When I first came back, I did a lot of reading of American novels. I did a lot of wandering around, and I was just very greatly relieved to be home, too.
And the first consequence of that was Sabbath Theater.
Sabbath Theater, yeah.
1995. Also, from this reader at the Georgetown University bookshop, Indignation is about a bright, fiercely independent college student trying to achieve success, avoid mediocrity, and forge a life beyond his overprotective father's reach. At the same time, it is the story of a headstrong boy with an overdeveloped sense of hubris, and this leads him to make a few choices that would have otherwise amounted to nothing had he not lived in America in the time of the Korean War draft. Of the two very different commentaries one could extract from your book, which did you intend to have the center stage? The absurdity of the draft and wartime, or the absurdity of adolescent rationality?
I certainly didn't intend the first. The draft wasn't absurd. The draft was a fact of American life and had been from 1940. This is now taking place in 1951, but the Second World War draft never ended. People were drafted after World War II, and then the Korean War came and the draft was continued. So the draft didn't seem an absurdity. It seemed like a part of American life, something that a young man had to pass through. What's the second absurdity?
Well, his rationality, and Marcus does have a kind of comical rationality. It's too big for him. It's the rationality of Bertrand Russell.
Yes.
And,
yes.
And he's got it practically memorized. Why I am not a Christian.
Well, yes, he's a deeply rational atheist, and this is a source of trouble for him.
The deeply conventional dean of the college listens to this tirade. He has the scoop, the right-wing scoop on Bertrand Russell, which is that he's immoral, he favors free love, he's a monster of godlessness, and so on. And this precocious demonstration of being done with religion and hating superstition, so impressive on the face of it, is another nail in the coffin, really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand what the gentleman is talking about now when he speaks of the rationality of an adolescent. I think that Marcus is victimized by his rationality rather than his irrationality. Yeah.
And this, which is a very large, open-ended kind of question, discuss the significance of your childhood neighborhood in Newark, New Jersey, which serves as the setting in Indignation. And she says several of your other novels, it's more than several, I think. Mm-hmm. The Weequake section of Newark.
Mm. Well, like any number of writers, Joyce would be an example. Saul Bellow would be an example. Mark Twain would be an example. I too have been drawn back to where I came from in books, and it's Newark is my Hannibal, Missouri. Newark is my Chicago. Newark is my Dublin, and so I've used it when I've needed a childhood. I've used it. I think it was a distinctive neighborhood, though typical enough in its time, but distinctive now looking back at it. And I don't know whether I've exhausted it or not.
This was a world in which you only met Jews up to a certain age. This was a childhood experience.
Are you allowed to?
Yeah, no, I'm wondering whether, because it's not so usual anymore for a young person to grow up in sealed up in.
Well, there were these neighborhoods which had a dominant group in a city like Newark and in a city like Detroit and a city like Cleveland. It's very similar. Philadelphia. There was a section that was Irish and a section that was Italian, a section that was what we then called Negro. That was the smallest section in the city of Newark when I grew up. Section of Slavs, and the Germans had been in Newark a long time, so they were sort of spread out, and then a section of Jews, and this was the nature of neighborhood life in America in the 30s and 40s.
In Jewish Newark, as well as in Irish or Italian Newark, there really was no such thing as divorce, was there? So when Marcus's mother comes to him and announces that she may have to divorce her husband, Marcus's father, it's preposterous, right? He has no frame of reference for.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's historically accurate. Mm-hmm. I don't remember. I remember one a girl in elementary school who lived with her mother, and her parents were divorced, and that was the strangest thing I could behold. But I don't remember coming across any other kids whose parents were divorced.
And it's really not a realistic plan on Mrs. Messner's part, anyhow.
No,
it's a hysterical moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ellen Kern and Flossie McNabb at Carpe Librum booksellers in Knoxville would like to put this question. As in your other novels where American politics play a role in the story, is Indignation in any way a commentary on this year's presidential elections? Please discuss.
No. First of all, I wrote it, I finished it a year ago, and I didn't know what was going to happen. But again, to repeat what I said earlier, I'm not interested in writing allegories or metaphors, but in bringing to life some moment from the past accurately.
Someone from Barnes & Noble here in New York, down in Tribeca, would like to know how you proceed. Do you start out with a solid plan? Do you ever start out with a plot? Or do you start always with a character?
I start with virtually nothing, with grains of nothing. And sometimes, and with these books we've been speaking about, I've started with a period, and I've been interested in that period, and I try to find what is the story that I can tell. There's 1,000 stories. But what's the story that I can tell that will somehow give a flavor of that moment and encapsulate it, make it vivid, make it dramatic. So I do sometimes early on come upon a character in a predicament, as say in American Pastoral. When I first began it, I was writing about the girl blowing up the building. I couldn't go anywhere with it. When I came back to it some 20 years later, I had the father of the girl. So he was in the predicament of being the father of this girl. Then I had the book.
Before we go, may I ask you to read a passage from Indignation?
Yes, indeed. The one we rehearsed?
The one we rehearsed.
Okay.
This is Big Mendelssohn.
Yes, this is when young Marcus, hero, is in the hospital having had his appendix removed. He's visited by his girlfriend Olivia, who's quite fascinated by the fact that he's a son of a butcher, kosher butcher. And she wants to hear all the stories she possibly can about his father's butchering. And so he rises to the occasion. And he tells her about this character named Big Mendelssohn, whose name she likes. And he says to her, Big Mendelssohn was an employee of his father's in the butcher shop. He says, Big Mendelssohn had a nasty mouth on him, he said. He really belonged in the back in the refrigerator and not in front waiting on customers. But I was 7 or 8, and because he had this nasty kind of humor, and because they called him Big Mendelssohn, I thought he was the funniest man on earth. Finally, my father had to get rid of him. What did Big Mendelssohn do that he had to get rid of him? Olivia asked. Well, on Thursday mornings, I told her, my father would come back from the chicken market, and he would dump all the chickens in a pile, and people would pick up whatever chicken they wanted for the weekend, dump them on a table. Anyway, one woman, a Mrs. Sklon, she used to pick up a chicken and smell the mouth and then smell the rear end. Then she'd pick up another chicken, and again she'd smell the mouth and then smell the rear end. She did the same thing every week, and she did it so many times every week that Big Mendelssohn couldn't contain himself. And one day he said, Mrs. Sklon, can you pass that inspection? She got so mad at him, she picked up a knife from the counter and said, if you ever talk to me that way again, I'll stab you. And Olivia says, and that's why your father let him go? And Marcus says, had to. By then he'd said lots of things like that. But about Mrs. Sklon, Big Mendelssohn was right. Mrs. Sklon was no picnic even for me, and I was the nicest boy in the world.
Thank you, Philip Roth. And thank all of you for joining us. You're going to like the book.